You remember when Donald Trump promised to drain the swamp? He said he was going to crack down on lobbyists, stop backroom deals, and make Washington work for the people instead of special interests. Well, guess what? Not only did that never happen, it was more of a first-term thing anyways. You don't really hear about it anymore. But honestly, the swamp has gotten even deeper. And it's not just big corporations or drug companies or cigarette companies that are hiring lobbyists here. It's foreign governments, even our adversaries like China and Russia. While Americans have been focused on stopping the illegal activities, the election interference, the social media influencing, we've ignored something even bigger. Foreign influence that is happening legally every single day in Washington, D.C. Russia and China spend millions of dollars hiring American lobbyists to shape U.S. law, policies, and even what politicians say about them. They don't need secret agents or spies when they can legally pay some of the most powerful people in Washington to represent their interests. And instead of stopping it, Trump and his allies have actually made it easier. When we think of foreign influence, we picture hackers trying to rig elections or bot farms trying to influence social media. But the real influence happens through expensive law firms and lobbying shops on K Street, where Russia and China have spent years building influence in Congress and the White House. Despite being under heavy sanctions for invading Ukraine, Russia still finds ways to legally push its agenda in Washington. Russian energy companies hire American lobbyists to fight restrictions on oil and gas exports. Russian banks pay firms to weaken financial sanctions that limit their ability to do business in the U.S. Russian interests quietly fund think tanks and media campaigns to shift public opinion in America. Even after the U.S. imposed tough sanctions on Russian oligarchs, companies like Novatek, a massive Russian energy firm, hired U.S. lobbyists in 2024 to help remove penalties that hurt its profits. And it's all perfectly legal. China, meanwhile, spends more than any other country on lobbying in the U.S., over $400 million in just the past few years alone. They hire top Washington firms to stop bans on Chinese technology companies like Huawei and DJI. They weaken U.S. trade restrictions that hurt Chinese businesses, and they influence lawmakers, think tanks, and even universities to push a friendlier view of China. So they don't need to bribe politicians when they can just hire their former staffers and lawyers to argue their case for them. And they're not just hiring lobbyists. We've seen former U.S. officials, defense experts, members of Congress work as paid advocates for Chinese companies, including some with actual ties to China's government and military. Trump has always talked tough about China and kind of looked the other way with Russia. But when it comes to actually stopping their influence in Washington, he's done the opposite. One of the strongest tools the U.S. has to expose and regulate foreign lobbying groups is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. It requires anyone working on behalf of a foreign government to register with the Department of Justice and to disclose what they're doing. For years, FARA really wasn't that strongly enforced, but then the DOJ decided to start cracking down. It led to high-profile cases like Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign chairman who was convicted for secretly lobbying for pro-Russian interests, and Maria Butina, a Russian agent who infiltrated U.S. conservative groups, including the NRA. But after winning his second term, Trump appointed Pam Bondi as Attorney General, and suddenly FARA enforcement started disappearing. Once Bondi took office, she weakened the DOJ's National Security Division, which is the office responsible for policing foreign lobbying. She sent a memo out that talked about how criminal cases against unregistered foreign lobbyists were going to be deprioritized. Planned reforms that came about under the Biden administration to make foreign lobbying more transparent were frozen. The DOJ's ability to force firms to register under FARA was restricted, and because of these changes, foreign governments can now lobby U.S. politicians with fewer restrictions than before. Even if they get caught not registering under FARA, they're more likely to get a civil fine instead of a criminal charge, which is a massive change from the past. And even though Trump keeps talking about being tough on China, his administration's policies have made it easier for China's lobbyists to operate in D.C. without consequences. So while everyone is worried about the various interferences that come about from these nations, the impacts on our elections and our media, the real foreign influence problem is happening in plain sight through legal lobbying. Russia and China don't need to break the law to influence U.S. policy. They just need to pay the right people. Trump's administration has made it easier for them by gutting the very agencies that were supposed to keep them in check. Despite his drain the swamp promises, the swamp is alive and well. Only now it's filled with foreign money and lobbyist groups working against American interests. Until the U.S. strengthens its foreign lobbying laws and fully enforces FARA, countries like Russia and China will continue shaping American policies from inside Washington, legally and without much resistance. The question is, how long are we going to keep letting them do this?